What's up, fam? It's Chappell back again with another episode of Recap Kickback, the podcast where I talk TV, movies, and whatever else catches my attention. One of the reasons I started Recap Kickback was to highlight and celebrate Black media and experiences, and I'm so happy today to be discussing this particular topic. Today's episode will be dedicated to the documentary Freaknik, The Wildest Party Never Told. And luckily, I feel like I have the two perfect co-hosts to talk about Freaknik with me. First, back for another weekly catch up. It's Mari Forth. Mari, what's up? Welcome to Freaknik Kickback.
Yeah, I'm always here, helping to host the kickback, spark discussions. I think this documentary in particular is going to spark a lot of discussion. It's been trending for the past like 3 days, I want to say, on Twitter. So I am really glad to get into this with you guys.
Okay, of course, this is going to be a fun one. And back by popular demand, my brother from another mother, a certified Freaknik alumnus, Tyrone. Tyrone is back. What's up?
What's happening, man? I'm excited for this one. I'm a true Atlanta native. I've had the pleasure, I guess, of joining Freaknik at one point in the latter stages of it. And so I'm excited to kind of talk about it and bring some accounts from some avid visitors of the event.
Yeah, we seen you in the video. We ain't gonna point you out, but if y'all the people with the keen eyes probably saw Tyrone in the background, freaknicking it up. But
I was on the side now. I wasn't, I wasn't,
you know, on the side.
I was on the side.
All right, when them screenshots come out, we'll see. But first and foremost, thank you all for listening to Recap Kickback. Thank you for subscribing and all your 5-star reviews. If you haven't already, be sure to head over to recapkickback.com and leave a 5-star review. This helps people find the podcast and will help expand our reach to hopefully cover more content just for you and all the Recap Kickback listeners. Thank you to Jason Reed last week for joining us to finish up the Black TV theme song bracket. If you didn't check out our 2-part Black TV theme song tournament, be sure to go listen to that. Audio can be found on Recap Kickback podcast feed wherever you get your podcast, and you can even watch the YouTube video at youtube.com/@recapkickback. Now, let's get into it. Mari, do we have any feedback from the tournament? I don't want to spoil the results if anybody's here, for the first time. But what did you think the consensus was about our ultimate champion of Black TV theme songs?
What I saw was a lot of brackets busted. I saw a lot of people like, how could you choose this over this? But I did see a lot of people like, well, of course they won. You know what I'm saying? Like,
right.
So I think it's good. Again, we're here to spark debate, discussion, friendly, and just open up and talk about our beloved Black TV shows. And I think that's exactly what the bracket did. So I'm so glad we got to do it. I'm so glad we got to revisit stuff that we hadn't really heard from in a long time, and maybe like down the road we'll do a couple rewatches and stuff like that. But it was so fun, and we love hearing from you. So again, reach out to us either on Twitter at Recap Kickback or in our Facebook group. Let us know what you're thinking, how you're feeling. Like, get into it, get into this discussion. That's what this is all about. So yeah.
No, thank you so much for that, Mari. Yeah, these the feedback we were getting was just like, oh, how could you pick this? But then also everybody seemingly okay with the ultimate winner. And I think that means we did something right. So yeah, in the future, we have to run something like that back. Obviously, if we can figure out another bracket or something to do, maybe next March, make it an annual thing, who knows? But I thoroughly enjoyed it for sure. But we have something new to talk about right now, right? We have to get into what's next on the docket, and it is Freaknik. Now, I remember when I saw the trailer for Freaknik, the documentary coming out on Hulu, I was thinking, oh, well, this is obviously something we have to talk about on Recap Kickback no matter what. But Mari, what was your initial reaction when you saw this? Because I saw a lot of people thinking, this might not be the best thing for TV.
My initial reaction was like, I wanted to know more. Like, I really thought that this was a good place to start. I think you, especially Black people, if you have a family in the South, I've heard a whole bunch of secondhand stuff about Freaknik and stuff like that. So I really wanted to see how Hulu is going to handle this documentary. And honestly, Hulu in itself does a pretty good job of they did the Firefest documentary. They do a pretty good job of kind of like really diving deep into these events and stuff, like these cultural events. So I was really excited. I also thought I was really happy to talk about it with you because, you know, we covered the Woodstock.
Yes.
We covered the Woodstock 99 documentary together over on Crime Scene. And I thought this would be a good place to kind of like compare and contrast and stuff like that. So yeah, really fun. I'm so excited to really get into this and really discuss like what was talked about, what was maybe not talked about, and stuff like that.
Yeah. I saw people being like, oh no, you know, whose mama is gonna pop up in the film, you know, who auntie you gonna see in the background. So there was a lot of question about like how scandalous this was gonna be. But Ty, I know you were pumped to hear about this documentary because aside from Mari, you're my natural first choice as our resident ATLian here. So you've been to Freaknik, you've grown up in Atlanta. Tell us about your experience in comparison to what we saw in the documentary.
So my experience actually with Freaknik, it was happening at the latter stages of it, and I know some people that might be listening right now, watching, is like, well, damn, how old are you?
50.
I went to Freaknik when I was in 8th grade, so I wasn't supposed to be there. But that's my experience. My experience is, wow, they let us free to be on the streets. And even though it was in the latter half when all of the blockade and stuff that we'll get to was happening, it was just an interesting dynamic. I have two brothers that are 7 and 10 years older than me. And so to hang out with them, to allow to be in their space, in their circle through that was pretty awesome. And just to see all of the people that wanted to come to Atlanta and enjoy Atlanta. I grew up in 90s, 2000s, hip hop age was really blooming in the South, but it was always an East Coast thing. And so I always had a lot of pride in Atlanta. So people wanting to visit or be down and enjoy themselves in Atlanta was always a huge thing for me. So that's why I enjoyed it. But I was trying to pay attention to who mama, auntie, daddy.
Like daddy, uncle.
Approve their face, not being blurred. Yeah. Like it was an interesting dynamic to watch for sure.
Oh yeah, I was people watching too. I saw a couple people that some celebrities maybe that didn't know that they were going to pop up in the documentary, but we'll talk about that when we get to it. For the people who are uninitiated, Freaknik, the Wildest Party Never Told, is described on Hulu as a celebratory exploration of the boisterous times of Freaknik, the iconic Atlantic street party that drew hundreds of thousands of people in the 80s and 90s, helping put Atlanta on the map culturally. But the first thing I want to talk about today is the part I didn't really know about, which was how Freaknik began as a party amongst kids in the AUC. Tyrone, this is something you probably knew about in Atlanta, right?
Yeah, a little bit. I didn't know the players that was involved with it, but you know, I know those 3 or 4 colleges that are in the AUC. Piedmont Park is kind of like a centralized location and has always been for them. And I always know, because of my brother, of the experience of those who don't have the ability to go off and have some sort of grandiose spring break. And so what do you do with those folks? And so I knew about the gathering. I just didn't know who the players were and kind of the story behind it. So it was new information for me somewhat.
Yeah, it was fun to hear about. Mari, you and I both attended HBCUs.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, and so I was very proud to see our representation here. And especially the part about, you know, seeing that, you know, HBCU students eventually led to the creation of one of the largest events for young Black men and women in America, Mari. And so, you know, we hear Atlanta referred to as the Mecca for Black people several times in here, but you come from a Mecca of your own.
Yes, the true Mecca, Howard University, the real HU, all of that. Yes, and so to hear the start of it was amazing. Again, shout out to the DC Metro Club who started it.
Put it on.
Yes.
There you go.
I love how they explained at HBCUs, they explained the city and state clubs, because we had those here too. I remember my freshman year, I didn't have to be a part of the DC Metro Club because clearly we were
you were home.
We were home. Yeah, you didn't need a club to be home. But like I remember being a part of like all sorts of different clubs. And I like how they said like, oh, the DC Metro Club was like that club that everybody's like, okay, that's the club. At Howard, the club that was like that club was the Louisiana Texas Club, aka the Latex Club, and they would be the ones like, yo, the latex parties, like, oh my God, that's the parties we gotta go to. We gotta go to the latex parties. And I loved hearing from the original founders what it was like Ty said, a gathering of people who really could not afford to go back home, and how the Atlanta University, the triangle, it was Clark Atlanta, Spelman, Morehouse, and Morris Brown, right? Is that the four? Yeah. And I mean, all of this just reminds me why I love going to HBCU. It reminded me why I was 10 thinking I was going to Spelman, and I would have gone to Spelman if they had my major, but they didn't. And just the camaraderie, to see the camaraderie in those first few Freakniks, where it was mostly just about like it was Black Spring Break, and it's like all of these kids who are in town are celebrating together, just being in the same space, seeing each other. I love that thought, and I'm not trying to be like separatist or anything like that, but it's like I really wish we could just get back to stuff like that, where it's like this was made for certain spaces, and then we can't have nothing. But
so well, you know what, that's very interesting, Mark. So two things, right? Of the four, the two in the middle, you got Morehouse and Spelman being all women, Morehouse being all men, is really kind of like tells the story of Freaknik all together. I love the fact that even nowadays, like Spelman and Morehouse kind of work together, and they have like a brother-sister connection where they kind of grow with each other throughout school. So it's a really deep dynamic and dope. But also, like, I feel like Howard University's homecoming is almost that space, because people will travel all over to go to Howard University's homecoming.
Yes, and it is not the same like it used to be. It is not the same like it used to be. Like and again, it's not about gatekeeping or anything like that. I think it's just about like times changing, and then not necessarily being able to keep up with the growing number of people. I think that's kind of like the problem across the board, because when it's a small event, a small cultural just city event, it's very easy. If it's a small college event, very easy. Once it gets to a level of like people are traveling all over the place to get there, it gets harder and harder to manage. I think Howard Homecoming, when I was there, was amazing. All the stuff that I heard about it beforehand seemed to translate while I was there. Since I've been gone now, it's just undergone so many different changes, to the point where it's just like it doesn't feel as student focused anymore at all either. Like I would have to talk to some of my alumni, but it's like it's kind of gotten even away from student planning. It's become such a event within itself that now it's like it's very sponsored, SponCon type thing. It's just not the same. It feels like it's not local businesses. It feels like it's not about the students or the alumni anymore sometimes. And it can get frustrating in a sense, like, and again, it's not about feeling secure, it's not about crime, it's not about anything like that. It's just about, are we getting away from our original intent? Exactly. And that's what I think we saw here in the Freaknik doc. Yeah, I think I definitely liked them explaining the name. What did you think about the name, Chappell?
Oh yeah, this was cool, because I wouldn't have known this. I just wouldn't have. We talk about Freaknik, and you hear freak and you think of the 90s version of what freak meant, right? Well, we will see later on Uncle Luke and Two Live Crew ushering in what the idea of a freak was in these party situations. But for this to start off as the freak, as my mom and them probably was doing, my mom and them wasn't in Freaknik, okay? They were already grown. My mom was at home taking care of her child. And so,
Same.
she was not there.
Well, I got a
But
funny story about that.
okay, we're gonna talk about it. But yeah, so to see that it started off as there, and then it just became, the freak. It was like the theme of whatever they were doing for for their spring break of that year, with what the state clubs were doing to make everybody feel at home. And then you combining it with Picnic, making it Freaknik made a lot of sense. We didn't have state clubs in Texas, Mari.
Really?
Well, because we're very far west. We're very far west. I mean, aside from what Meharry in California, there's not a lot of HBCUs further west than us, and so you have to go out of your way to go to Texas, basically. So we didn't have state clubs, but it was some factions. You had like Houston at Prairie View A&M. We had Houston, we had Dallas, and then we had everybody else. And then everybody else could fit into whatever groups they were in, but it was Houston and Dallas because that's where everybody went. At Prairie View, Texas Southern. Maybe if you're in Dallas, you probably went to Paul Quinn, or Houston Tillotson down south. But yeah, it was very much divided for a reason. And so
we had a 4-hour difference between those two cities.
Oh, from Houston and Dallas, yeah, 4 hours for sure. Wow. Yeah,
at Howard, we were overrun by people from New York and New Jersey. Like, I had never met so many people from New York and New Jersey.
Yeah,
there, and it was just so funny. I'm from Maryland, so it was so funny, like hearing their slang versus our slang, and the melding pot of like a whole. But we had so many state clubs because so many different people came from all different places. But yeah, that's so interesting.
Yeah, because it takes forever to drive out of Texas. Go ahead.
No. I think it's interesting. I know we're talking about things around it because we're trying to think about all of the different styles that introduce partying or introduce a sort of gathering or whatever the case may be. Because I know Howard University is heavy Greek, and Freaknik wasn't like that. Like you had Greek there, but it wasn't heavy Greek, right? You didn't have to be Greek to come, or at least feel comfortable coming and things like that. So it was just a free for all. That's the love of it, and that's the end of it.
From what we saw in like the beginning intentions and with the original founders, and those, so they show us, I think it was founded in what was it, 82, 84 or something like that.
There, yeah, in the early 80s. I believe it's 83 was when 83. They said the first group got together. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. And so we saw 83, we saw a little bit of 84, and then they kind of yada through the 80s until like about 89. But from what I do understand from, we did watch some outside sources as well, just to get a little bit more background. Greek life did become pretty heavily involved with Freaknik, because we later on we see that they held step shows, and of course they're always strolling somewhere. But it wasn't exclusively Greek. Howard being home to like the alpha chapters of most of the Greek organizations, a lot of our events focus around them, but also still in an inclusive way. So you just don't get in their way. You don't get in their way, they won't get in yours. So it was the main part in the first, like we said, in the first half of Freaknik, but by the time it gets to the end, like Luke said, oh, this ain't no little Greek event anymore, which
it's always been a thing with Greek. For the people that don't know, I never went Greek or anything like that. I never joined any type of frat. My oldest brother did. My middle brother didn't, and it wasn't anything like wrong with it or anything like that. It was just, some sort of club that I guess I personally was like, I'm good, I'm okay with it, right? I'll just watch it from afar type of thing. But I definitely do recall, like, seemingly in the 90s, and maybe it's been like this in all decades, is that there was some sort of disdain for folks outside of Greek towards Greek, and then for folks that are in Greek towards the people outside of Greek. And that's why you hear those statements from Uncle Luke and stuff like that, or even some of it might have been purposeful change of how Freaknik showed itself in the 90s, because that's the Freaknik that people recall is the 90s version of it.
Yeah. Chappell could probably really give us an insight on this.
As the Greek on the panel here, you see my fraternity throughout this documentary several times. Every time I see him, I get hyped. Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated just shining on these boys, and per usual. But yeah, I think that the disdain probably from like Uncle Luke or something is just that Uncle Luke was bringing his Miami party vibe to a college atmosphere, and on college campuses, a lot of times the hierarchy is that the Greek people are the ones like socially. Who hold the status, right? And so it's like they're not any better, any smarter, any whatever, but it is a status club a lot of times to get into those organizations. And so we saw Mark Lamont Hill in this documentary even saying that some people were just going to Freaknik so that they can get viewed by the Greeks. So that would be their introduction into, okay, if I was there, then people would see me and then know that I would be interested to join. And so I don't know if it's a natural disdain or it was just like Uncle Luke's just not a part of that environment. So when he comes, he's thinking, no, this is the show. Freaknik is what I'm bringing to the table, which is the freaks, as opposed to the Greeks.
Lay freak.
And the Greeks and lay freak, and freak out. So I think that a lot of times, like, look, the Greeks are not opposed to getting freaky. Those other Greeks, they're just not wholesome at all. Not family men. They don't.
Them other ones,
whatever.
But listen, so you see a lot of that in the documentary as well. But yeah, I think that the evolution is clear, and the divide really shows up with Uncle Luke.
Yeah, and it's like again, like especially on our campus, like it's a real big deal. Like it's a truly big deal to pledge Alpha Chapter. And I don't know if I've told Chappell this, but I had every intention. Again, I was a 10-year-old who was like, I'm going to Spelman, I'm pledging AKA, I'm doing all this stuff. But once you get on campus and you see like the money that's required, you see the time commitment that was required. For me, I couldn't do it because of the time commitment, because so many people pledged, they never had lines every year because they just couldn't, because it was just too much.
It was too much.
So so they would have lines like every 2 years. And then on top of that, there was a rule you can't pledge as a freshman. So they had a line my freshman year, couldn't pledge, and then the next one wasn't until I was a junior. But I was there for school, and my degree required me as a junior to also work in a hospital. So there's no feasible way that I could have done everything that I was doing and pledge. And I was okay with it, because on our campus, it's a status thing, but we truly tried to make sure that it wasn't like there wasn't as much animosity. It's so easy to like turn on each other. It's easy to see that a lot online nowadays and stuff like that. But really in person, like it truly is like a vibe. We, Asia, one of our other podcaster, she's an AKA. We always asked her, I remember when we did that Insecure episode, when they were talking about it, when Insecure had shown some letters and people on social media were getting upset. I think we got to remember that social media is just like a small microcosm of what really happens outside, because even Asia was like, no, I didn't care. You know what I'm saying? Like, you know what I'm saying? So it's like, we don't want to try and foster that thought process, but I could definitely see why back then it was a thing, especially when it's two worlds colliding, because again, this isn't your college Greeks versus your college students who understand the reverie of the social status and all the clubs. It is these college Greeks versus Miami party life, or people that that this is not a college thing anymore. You know what I'm saying? So I wasn't surprised. Like Chappell said, I wasn't surprised that this was like kind of the back and forth we kind of got at the event.
Yeah, we see that, we see the resurgence, or the emergence of the HBCU popularity in movies like School Days, talked about it.
School Days.
School Days is one of the movies that kind of thrust that into the forefront. A Different World, which we talked about on our theme song bracket, as well as our TV sitcom bracket. I mean, rankings. We talked about it a few times, but it really did put those conversations in the forefront. And so that drew a lot of attention to Freaknik. People were like, oh, we're talking about HBCUs, we're talking about Greek fraternities, we're talking about college kids hanging out. And then college kids and high school kids were watching this on TV and saying, okay, well, when I go to college, I need to go do that. Right. Exactly. And so that's how it starts.
Yeah.
And then around the 90s, the word freak takes on a different meaning. And we see that people were like, oh no, a lot of college kids are coming to this. College kids are coming from all around. What if college kids had the best party music as well? And that's where we insert where we're shown in the documentary, we're showing Jermaine Dupri, but we're also showing Uncle Luke kind of almost simultaneously. So Ty, you can speak to this probably a lot more. In Atlanta, Jermaine Dupri is royalty as far as like the hip hop scene goes. He is a person who in this documentary is credited with some of the explosion here. What was it like around that time? Because you were kicking it around this time. And I know you've seen all the Atlanta artists that come around. Tell us a little bit about your experience.
Yeah, man, I really think Hulu Documentary did a great job of explaining Atlanta hip hop and the history and the culture behind it, because we weren't played on radios. You can hear it in Outkast rhymes that we weren't being played on our radios. And so you got this guy like Jermaine Dupri, who is starting to see himself involved in circles beyond Atlanta, but at the same time show pride in Atlanta. That's all we ever wanted. And so what Freaknik brought to the table was an opportunity for us to get our music out to the masses. Look at me, I'm saying us. That's how much pride I have in Atlanta, right? It ain't my damn music, but getting our music out to the masses, because you saw how long it took to get Freaknik popular. It started in 83. It got popular in the 90s. No internet, no social media, no anything
all
like
word of mouth.
All word of mouth, right? And so what a great opportunity where we have a bunch of young hip hop listeners coming to one centralized location. Let's go ahead and attack it. And so you got Jermaine Dupri, even a lot of things that Uncle Luke did, we kind of claimed from Atlanta, even though we know it's Florida, right? And then Outkast and Goody Mob, etc. Right? It was just 90s, mid 90s was a beautiful thing for Atlanta music. Something I will tout to this day. I still listen to this day. And I think Freaknik had a true huge part of it, of getting it out to other people in the world. So it was great. It was great.
That was the part I really found surprising. I had no idea about that. I always thought, you always think regionally everybody has their own, music process and stuff like that. But for them to be like, oh yeah, down here they're playing New York hip hop.
It's East Coast.
New York East Coast hip hop, and I just always assumed that there was always a Goody Mob and an Outkast and stuff like that, and that it just took us longer to hear it. But to kind of be like, nah, it wasn't even being played down here until we got our hooks into more people, more ears. That was very, very, very fascinating to me. And I always think of the like second wave of Atlanta hip hop, like your Little Johns and stuff like that. Yeah. But it's just like that was astounding. I did love that portion of the music aspect of it, the background. Them saying like, oh, you would sell cassettes that it would be like a sample. So you have one full song on the one side, and on the other side you have a snippet to get people to buy the album. And back then you had to physically buy albums. You couldn't just stream them and stuff like that. And that was so interesting. I really love that they dived into that aspect.
Yeah, East Coast music ran things for so long, and radio stations would play them because they want to have listeners. And if that's the thing that is showing out all over the US, then I get it. I just think they should have done. I definitely think hip hop stations should have done a really better job of saying, hey, during this hour or two, we're just playing local stuff, right? Just a little segment to people out there. But they really didn't do that until early 90s.
Yeah, even in Houston, in the Texas area, we had a very similar music distribution to this, which was, we had like the Kappa Beach Party that a lot of people know about because they would pass out the great cassettes, the screw tapes and stuff like that. A lot of those mixtapes and stuff would get distributed at like parties and functions, and like the Kappa Beach parties where a lot of those mixtapes would get the Back to the Kappa mixtapes, all that kind of stuff would get distributed. And so that's where a lot of music would get out, prior to the internet. And so I was like, man, there's a lot of parallel there between what was happening in Freaknik and then what later on goes on and happens at the Kappa. And so I was like, okay, cool. This is new information for me. I really enjoyed that part. And just to see, the big names that were involved, right? I mean, we saw Usher at the Rim Shop. Usher, who had to been like all of 16 years old, maybe.
That's what I was about to say.
Right.
Right.
Tupac was there, Goody Mob, obviously. T.I. was there. Just a lot of big names from Atlanta. And we had a lot of big names speaking on this. We saw your boy Killer Mike, Tyrone.
Yes, that's my guy, man. I think Killer Mike's presence on here was really centered around just his ability to do storytelling, right?
Mm-hmm.
The historian of Atlanta, of a lot of things, but Atlanta in general. And so he can kind of give the background of Jermaine Dupri. And I think it was important for him to do that because a lot of, especially current folks, and even some folks in the hip hop business kind of, shun Jermaine Dupri a little bit because regardless of the situation, the way that he approached putting Atlanta on the scene, a lot of people would consider like kiddie, right? It wasn't hard or anything like that. It didn't talk about Bankhead and the places like that where things went down. So I think it was good for Killer Mike to come on and kind of do that storytelling. I also want to give a shout out to Kilo Ali. That's the attachment to Miami music, right? He has attachment to Outkast, which you won't attach booty shaking music to Outkast, but he had an album, I think it was called Organized Bass, which was produced by Organized Noise that also produces the Outkast music, but it had like a Miami style music to it. And that was the attachment from Uncle Luke to Atlanta was Kilo Ali. And then it kind of spread from there.
Can I put on my crime scene hat here? So
do your thing.
Over on the Crime Scene podcast, when we analyze documentary docuseries, we talk about the talking heads. And I am not going to lie, the talking heads are kind of fall flat for me in a sense of they lean so heavily on celebrity talking heads that I feel like we missed the human element. Me personally, my favorite talking heads were like the founders, some of the like research professors and stuff like that, or people who were there, later on. Unfortunately, the victim, I think, what was her name? Stacey Lloyd. I wanted more firsthand accounts from regular people, like Jalen. What's his name? Jalen Brown, the basketball player. What's his dude's name? I forget his name. Jalen. Right? Yeah.
What are you talking about? Oh, Jalen Rose.
The Fab Five.
Jalen
Rose. Yeah.
I was like,
there's way too many
Brown.
Jalens in the sport. Jalen Rose, he's from Michigan. Fab Five talking about how he drove down there to Freaknik. Like, great, but that's not to me a firsthand account of like a regular person. We're having Rashida from Housewives of Atlanta talking about her experience, but we'll get to her section, but like doesn't come off sincere to me. You know what I'm saying? Does that make sense? Like, I truly wish they got out and got firsthand experiences from people who were there, who were maybe just college students or people who were not college students but came in town. I'm not even gonna talk about how egregious it was to have CeeLo's ass on there. I don't give a shit who. I don't give a shit what band he comes from. I didn't need to see him on my TV. So like to me, I feel like that was lacking because real quick into my funny story, I'm sitting here like, my mama was way too old for this. I was a baby. She won't nowhere near this. I talked to my TT later that night.
Mm-hmm.
Like my literal TT, my auntie, who's 15 years older than me, who raised me. And she's like, oh yeah, girl, I was a Freaknik like at least 4 or 5 years in a row. I was like, of course you were, because you were exactly that age, living in Atlanta / Florida, going back and forth. And she was telling me she was there like I think I want to say 98 might have been her last year. I told her to watch it and get back to me and I'll do an update. But like she was like, yeah, I went like 4 years in a row, maybe 5 years in a row. I didn't see any crime. I didn't see anything. She was like, where we were at, we were having fun. You know, it was a pretty good experience. Like I didn't have to deal with a lot of the stuff. And I was like, this is what I want to hear. Ty's family. These are the stuff I want to hear. I don't think I necessarily wanted to hear from all of these celebrities. Chappell, am I too much here? What do you think?
I think the issue is that these people are celebrities to us, Mari, because we know them from television. But I think in the time, like they're talking about their experience and they're not celebrities. Rashida at that time is not a celebrity. She might be like locally Atlanta famous, but you know, even then, she said she was working at the mall, you know, when people were coming to get their fits and stuff. So yeah, it's like they use a recognizable name, but she was very much a person of the community. Even you know, you send me the clip, but there's a true life documentary about Freaknik, or a true life episode about Freaknik from way back when. And so even in that, you still have the same talking, like you still have the Goody Mob talking as the talking heads. And so we know them as the Goody Mob, yes. But in Atlanta, they were the Goody Mob, but of Atlanta, you know, like know these people, you could see them locally at the store, probably see them at the mall and stuff like that. So yeah, it's like in a way they're big names, but at the same time, because Atlanta is such a microcosm and like what they were saying, like its own little Black America in a bubble, I think that they were still very much locals and part of that experience. But I agree with you. I think that seeing those big names is like knowing that like Jalen Rose is somebody of a certain status coming from Michigan. Like, don't get me wrong, Jalen Rose, like he's not from Atlanta, so he comes there and he's relatively new, but he's also Jalen Rose that's a part of the Fab Five. So, you know, he's going to be able to use his clout to get into better situations than some people. Whereas like, I kind of want to hear about, you know, what is the random, the random person from Michigan who just showed up experiencing at Freaknik. So I kind of see exactly what you're saying. Ty, your experiences would be that you were living in Atlanta while this is happening. I imagine it feels like it's happening to you all instead of a part like at some point. Because when people just start coming, it's not like Atlanta is saying come one, come all. At some point, there were people who were going to come regardless.
Yeah. And I would say is less happening to me and to my brothers because where the location of it is, which is downtown Atlanta, and then later on Midtown, it was further away from the home, right? So any type of extra traffic or anything like that, I didn't really feel that necessarily. So from my brother's perspective, it was all just enjoyment of having other people coming from different locations. And the biggest thing that I heard from my brothers that was being there and my cousins that also went there as well, is just, we got a different opportunity to talk to another girl from a different city, from a different location. That was the fun of it, right? They didn't have all the criminal activity as a part of their group and their center or whatever the case may be. They didn't see that. They've been down. My brother did say, my oldest brother, he did say like he would see like a woman, of course. The event says, hey, you express yourself freely. You are scantily clad, right? Walk through a group of hounds, that might bark or that might say something. And then there might be like a light touch or something like that. Like that was the experience. I know you mentioned Stacey Lloyd, right? It didn't get to the point of, they didn't see the rape, right? It didn't get to the point. It was manslaughter out there. They didn't see the manslaughter, right? I think people get to the point of Freaknik has this negative stigma that's attached to it. And maybe local people just don't really want to be the front face person that's talking about it at that point. I do think that accounts from people that were kind of like boots on the ground that's not famous would have been appreciated. I just don't know how many people are actually willing to talk about it, to do that, because it just has so much negative stigma. Like these people are probably not just parents and aunties and uncles and grandparents, right? They might be like some business owners, that went to Freaknik. they don't want that a part of their business. And so it's hard to get a full account when you're doing stuff like that. But from my experience, when I went in 1998, which was obviously the latter half of it, and in my brother's accounts, they didn't see all that. They saw the stuff that might have led to it eventually, but they didn't see all the extra stuff.
Well, let's get into what might have led to it, right? So again, Uncle Luke is the villain in this story. Also, probably not the villain, but like I think all of this stuff collided at the perfect time for it to blow up the way it did. You have Uncle Luke going through his legal battles about censorship and being able to perform his art the way he wants to perform his art, and then you have the emergence of all this Black culture in Atlanta based on the way the politics break down, based on the college atmosphere, a bunch of Black people getting education and then staying in Atlanta and working and building their own community. And then all that stuff happening right around the time where it became very popular to let your freak flag fly a little bit. And this is at a time where social media is not around. So you could tuck off to Atlanta for the week, go live a little bit less conservative than you would, and then come back home and tell the stories of it, to the point where it had gotten so big, people were talking about it, people taking pictures, trying to commemorate these moments, that it became something that everybody wanted to go to. Mm-hmm. Now, it then shifts because Uncle Luke does not make music for college kids. He makes music for everybody. And so that means everybody now feels like they're able to attend these events. And so it goes from people being roughly 20, 25, 30 years of age to, right, to 40-year-old, 50-year-old, just people coming from far and wide just to be a part of the function, just to be in the mix. And so at that point, you do have now kind of like a mixture of everybody, people who might not want to keep the same integrity of this is a college party, or maybe people who don't care about Atlanta, so they're not worried about how it looks when you're going outside and you're urinating on somebody's yard, or you're in front of somebody's business acting crazy. You just got people who are using Atlanta as a place to kind of just let loose. Ty mentioned the scantily clad clothing for some of the women. And I think for in the South, it's very easy to say, I'm going to wear less clothes because it's hot. Number one, it is hot. And a lot of these places, a lot of people are coming from places that are not hot. So you come down there and you come to dress because you're like, oh, this is comfortable for me, right? And it starts off as that. We see the short skirts, we see the booty shorts. But then Rashida tells us about the coochie cutters part.
Yeah. It all of this collides at the same time of the what is called the Black female sexual liberation. But of course, Black female sexual liberation comes at the same time that rape culture has to rape culture, because rape culture is always going to rape.
Because that's what it be. Mm-hmm.
That's what it happens. And at first, when they're talking about the Black female sexual liberation, I'm like, okay, all right. Rashida being the one delivering it, I don't know, man. I again feel like we could have had people. I think there was like a doctor somewhere in there. I forget her name, but like somebody who actually has done the history of that movement and the actual like movement of it all. But we get Rashida talking about like, oh, you kind of wear short shorts, but sometimes you wear shorter shorts, and this whole like dichotomy of like you could wear what you want, but also you might get some negative attention. It felt like really weird and kid glovey to me. Like instead of outright saying like women were starting to take agency, they said women are starting to take agency of their body. They're starting to be more sexually liberated and free. And, that's a good thing. That's always a good thing when women take agency and say, hey, this is my body. This is what I want to do with it. That's always a good thing. Unfortunately, there's always going to be also the other side of like, yes, well, this is what you're dressing like. This is what you're doing like. So I get to override your agency and help myself. And it's just the opposite, like Ty said. And so them talking about the liberation of Black women, it felt like it was incomplete. And then they came back to it at the end when they were talking about crimes and sexual assaults going up near the later half of the Freaknik. I just don't know if I'm fully satisfied on how they handled these. It's kind of like in the Woodstock documentary, Chappell, where we had like the whole segment of just like all of the horrendous things that happened at Woodstock and the reasons why, and how they laid out the confluence of events of stuff that was just led to like horrific acts being done, you know. And I think that the documentary wanted to stay away from it a little bit more because, like Ty was saying, like it might have that negative stigma. But I feel like if you have something that has a negative stigma to it, you can't ignore it because it just makes you feel like you're covering it up. And that's what I was kind of feeling when I first saw that section of that really quick section, and they didn't talk about the sexual assault. So I was like, at first I was like, okay, that's a little weird. And like I said, they came back to it in a minimal way, but I just don't know. You know, I don't know if they fully fleshed it out. And I think you could fully flesh it out without painting broad strokes on the whole event itself. It like Ty just beautifully did it. You know what I'm saying? Like it should be very easy to lay out like these were the things that we were seeing happening, and you know, we got to do better, and then be like, but this event was still bigger than that. Like this event was still successful. This event still wasn't as bad as they made it seem, you know. And they do get to that part. They do get to the like, oh, nobody's saying anything about Daytona. Nobody's saying anything about Galveston, but it the way they presented it felt like whataboutism to me. So I don't know. Am I too deep again? Am I in too deep?
I don't think you're too deep. I think this is why we have the conversation, right? I think for me, the documentary painted it as almost like a timeline, right? So you get the Rashida conversation about the shorts and the scantily clad outfits or whatever, but that's like 94, right? And that's around the time Uncle Luke is doing his thing, but it's getting more and more like outward, you know, to the point where around the time when the people in their 30s and 40s start showing up and their 50s,
it's
and
predatory.
Stuff like that. Right.
They say it. They say it gets a predatory vibe.
But I think it's because of the money, right? So we talk about Atlanta as a place where it has an entrepreneurial like energy about it, right? We see people selling shirts. I've seen so many Freaknik shirts in the 90s when I was growing up. People just would have a shirt, you know. You never, I didn't know if they were buying it from the store, if they actually went to Freaknik, you know, just they had the shirts. They had the merch. People were trying to make money. And so you got Uncle Luke selling sex as an idea in his music. And then you got people in their 30s and 40s coming to literally sell sex. We saw people, some people in the documentary saying they would drive past cars and people would be charging for peep shows. And so I think when sex workers start showing up, and this becomes a place where you could buy, you know, those services. You could say, okay, well, this is a service I want. I think it starts to kind of influence the way people are looking at the event. Like, oh, okay, this is an event where we just doing all the freaky stuff out in the open.
Freaky stuff, not the Nick stuff.
Right, exactly. Just the freaky stuff out in the open. And then the way people have always treated sex workers has always been just problematic in general, right? And so they're thinking, I could just grab this person, touch this person, pick this person up. And then they start treating everybody like that. You know, any passerby who's wearing what I would consider, you know, hoochie clothes or whatever. Maybe that's like, oh yeah, you dress like that girl's dress, so I'm gonna treat you like I was treating her. It's like, well, that person charged you and told you that you could do that, gave you their consent, and this person did not. And I think there's a lot of that going on at one time. And I think it's really hard to disseminate. Well, what is happening here, right? Is this a bunch of people who are just these bunch of wild and crazy kids who are out here just, you know, being freak nasty? Or is it a bunch of kids and a bunch of freaks and then a bunch of people being freak nasty and then a bunch of innocent people and they all look the same? Everybody's dressed the same. Everybody's wearing the same uniform, right? So you don't really know where one thing ends and one begins. And I think by the time they come back to the sexual assault, I think that's past the 1994 era, and that's closer to, you know, the 96, 97, 98 type era, you know. So that's how I read that situation.
Yeah, by the time the doc ended, that's how I read it as well.
Yeah, 96, 97 is when the true debauchery that we're talking about with the sexual assault, all of that happened. And another thing that they kind of glossed by during the 94, 95 transition all the way into the Olympics is that, you know, Maynard Jackson was the mayor of Atlanta. It was his second stint as the mayor of Atlanta from 90 1990 to 1994, and then it switched to Bill Campbell, who's also African American, but his role was really related to post-civil rights. Let's bridge these white voters, right? And so the eye of the white voters really truly came and focused on Freaknik, right? And that's where the transition was. A part of Bill Campbell's kind of thing as mayoral
campaign. Yeah.
Was economic, right? Bring the economy into Atlanta, right? And so that's where they talked about, hey,
they did talk about
bringing so much of dollars, but look, we got the Olympics coming. You got to get your act together, right? So all of that happened at the same. It was just a hodgepodge of things that happened at the same exact time, where you got non-college kids coming in, you got a new mayor that's trying to bridge white voters, you got a new mayor that's trying to bring a higher economic budget into the Atlanta, and then you've got the female liberation and all of the extra sexual, we are free to do what we want, and it doesn't mean that I need this or I want this from you, happening all at the same time. And that's what kind of blew the whole damn thing up.
Exactly.
Yeah, the Olympics is a big catalyst here as well. With the Olympics coming, like, it's crazy because you say, all right, we're announcing the Olympics. That means we got roughly 4 years to prepare for that. So what are we going to do? And over those years, Freaknik is still happening. And so people who are starting to figure out how they can capitalize on the Olympics are seeing Freaknik happen and saying, oh, that might be bad for business. Remember, this is the 90s. So this is the age of, politicians telling people that black people are super predators and that, are wild, and the crime bill. All that stuff is happening around that same time. And so people already are looking at black people in a certain way. And then you have Freaknik happening and getting bigger and bigger and more debaucherous as it's going on. And so Atlanta decides we're going to crack down on that. We're not going to let Atlanta be the face of that. We're not going to let Freaknik be the face of all this debauchery, even though it had been so prosperous up until then, right? So they said, we're going to shut it down. So they try to correct by getting the police involved, by trying to basically mandate how Freaknik is going to function. So this has gone from now a college campus thing to a citywide thing where the government is saying, okay, here's what we're going to allow you to do. And naturally, people don't like when the government gets their hands on things that have nothing to do with them. And so they start to push back. We see, Ty, that they start blocking off roads when Freaknik comes around, to where the traffic is unbearable. Now, Atlanta traffic is already bad. This had to be a billion times worse.
It was terrible, like absolutely horrendous. They talked about how they would push people from downtown towards Midtown, and anybody that's listening that might be younger age, that never really had the chance to either hear about or experience Freaknik, and you've been to Atlanta, you would say, oh, Midtown is happening. It is now. At the time, it really wasn't. And they were just pushing people out. And what ends up happening is, when you start to push people out, even though a lot of crime happens around Midtown right now, it's a lot of rich crime. At the time, it was a lot of like low collar crime. And so when you start to push people out of downtown into these areas, now you're getting into the hood. You know what I mean? You're getting into where, people see an opportunity to like capture on something that they don't have, right? They see all of these people that are around, and then they try to take advantage, right? So that was another part of the story that kind of ended up happening. And it's just so interesting, the focus and the attention that they had on it. Really should have been focused on Eric Dan Rudolph. Yeah, man, I just think they should have been focusing on Eric Murphy, as, if y'all don't know, is the bomber of the Olympics in 1996. That should have been the focus that they were on, with the security around there, but they wasn't. And all of that frustration of the movement and all of that, it just adds on, right? It's not an excuse for sexual assault or anything like that. It just adds things on top of it for people who come down and travel. You heard it. They don't have hotels. They sleeping in their car. My brother had a Jeep, by the way, because of Freaknik. But they sleeping in their car. They don't have hotels, right? And so you come here to experience something that you've heard great things about, and then you get ushered to a different location that doesn't have the same experience, and you're just sitting in traffic. And it's not the same type of sitting in traffic that it was, because you're going somewhere that you just don't know how to get to, right? And so it was just a whole bunch of things that just led up to all of the things that went to a tragic ending. And I tell you this, my brothers agree with the documentary, and that ain't no coming back, right? There's no more, ain't no coming back for it, right? It is what it is.
I think some things just have a time. There's a time and a space for certain things and certain movements, and I think Freaknik had its time. I think that from my point of view, we just explained why it worked, right? It was the college atmosphere. It was the AUC. It was also, this emergence of Black people just, trying to have these gatherings. When then you had Black music booming in Atlanta at that time, where all this stuff was feeding into each other. And I think it had its time. I'm not saying that we don't need a Freaknik type party, but I definitely don't think Freaknik itself is necessary right now. Some of the talking heads say, there was no social media, so I think it's different. It's like you're absolutely right. There was no social media, and I think that a lot of the reason why these people came to Freaknik was because they wanted to be able to escape some of their conservative upbringing in the South. I'm coming from South Carolina because my mama's not gonna let me dress like this. We see women in this very documentary saying, hopefully you don't dress like that at home, because. But people are coming to Freaknik to do it like a once in a lifetime, once a year getaway situation. And I think it had its moment to where all that stuff made it make sense to where like, okay, that might not happen again, but there are definitely other things you can do to encourage Black joy. And I don't think it necessarily has to be Freaknik, Mari.
I don't know, because to me it kind of sounds like, oh, you can't do that anymore because you can't be held accountable for if you do something wrong. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think, yeah, exactly. Like, I think it's proven, everything I said about Howard Homecoming aside, I think it's proven that like this is the time of like festivals. People love a good festival. You know what I'm saying? Turning Freaknik, they showed in the documentary the guy who applied for the trademark and turned it into like a concert. They had like a business plaza, a health thing. It was given very much like Insecure's the block party.
The block party, yeah.
Yeah. Like I don't see why you couldn't do something like that. Like that's still fun. You know what I'm saying? Oh, it's not Freaknik. It's not the same. It's not like it's not unregulated. Got you. I understand that.
Exactly.
But
that's hard.
Yeah,
and that's why I say that time has passed. Yeah, but we're in a time where we want to hold people accountable, right? Like I get, I get the want to keep regulation to a minimum, especially when it's coming from white people who have no clue what Freaknik is, where it started, where it came from, or anything like that. Cool, I get that. But at the same time, saying I want that old thing back, it's like it's not realistic because that was a time and a place in a society in a bubble. Yeah, in a vacuum, right? Like everything was like, you can't say, oh, okay, I want people to be able to sneak off and dress looser than they normally dress or wear less clothes and all this other stuff without people knowing in an age where everyone's going to know because of social media. Those two things are not the same. We've moved past that. You want to say, okay, we don't need social media no more, so you want your Freaknik back. Okay, well, you're going to be sacrificing a lot by giving up social media and like the internet and all the developments we've made now to get that back. So it's like, yeah, I think that happened. But I think there are definitely spaces where you can promote this kind of joy, this type of togetherness in a healthy, public way. They was like, okay, well, people are making sure that everybody's being held accountable. Nobody's assaulting anybody. All those things can happen, but it won't be the Freaknik that you wanted. And sometimes we look back fondly on the times and say, that was cool for what it was, and we really liked it. We wish we could have that. When a lot of times we look at that stuff more fondly because it's in the past, right? We talked about it a couple times. There were crimes, there were definitely people who were affected negatively. Stacey Lloyd talks about how when her clothes were ripped off in a crowd full of people. In the True Life, the True Life episode, we actually see firsthand account of that exact moment where the people that they're following on True Life are like, yeah, we looked to our left and we saw a woman getting her clothes ripped off. We see different. We see different retellings of that same exact moment. And so for Stacey Lloyd, she's like, yeah, I liked Freaknik, but I don't like that. We see.
I don't even think that was her. Like that,
Right.
you know, was
Yeah,
just
that might not
another
even been
person.
her.
No,
Right,
I don't think that was
exactly.
her. So
And
like,
so yeah, it's like it sounds like, oh, that one isolated incident. We don't want to paint this entire people or this entire function as some type of, you know, horrible thing when it wasn't, because those were isolated incidents, and isolated incidents happen, especially when you are using the cops to do things other than fight crime, right? But at the same time, that does not change people's experience. There were people on this very documentary saying, I'm never coming back. I actually don't want to come back to this. This was not fun. I don't like this. I don't like the way people are being treated. I don't like the way women are being treated. I don't like the way we're being treated. And so those things that you want back, yeah, you could look back fondly on the good things, but also you have to acknowledge that there were negative things that went along with that as well. And so, yeah, try finding a space, carving out a new Freaknik type event that allows you to express Black joy and allows you to, you know, uplift each other and build community around, but learn from the mistakes of Freaknik of the past. And I think that's the important part that that I took away from it, because we see George Hawthorne have to literally step in and say, that's it, it's over. After this last one, we're not doing it again. Freaknik is done. They tried changing the names, Black Spring Break College Weekend or whatever, to ultimately saying, shut it down. And it got to the point of no return. And so now all we have, Mari, is nostalgia.
Yeah, I mean, that is all it is at this point. You know, it's a shame. It's a shame, because from what my TT told me, it's like it was a place for them to go have fun, like really just let loose and just be around people who are like them. That's another reason why I like the True Life. There was a True Life Freaknik 1998. If you do not know what True Life is, I feel so sorry for you, because it's one of the greatest things that MTV ever used to do. Why they stopped, who knows? But MTV actually followed a group of 3 different groups of college students to Freaknik in 1998. 3 different ones. Some Iotas from Maryland, some Iotas from Keene University. Not that snicker.
I didn't say nothing.
And some women from ECU, East Carolina, from Greenville. That's where my peoples are from. And they were literally there with firsthand accounts and talking to witnessing their experiences. And the Iotas from Keene, when they saw what happened to that woman who we saw on camera, they even rewound it and slowed it down. I was like, dang, what happened to her getting her clothes ripped off? They immediately, the guys were like, man, that made me think about my approach completely different. Like, I'm like, hey, Miss, may I talk to you? Like it really showed the effect of seeing some of that stuff and how it changed some of their perspectives. And then we even get this whole scene where it's just very raw and upfront and people talking about it, and, you know, some very problematic ideals being laid out, you know, from from some of the women, even some of the women there, like, oh, if you're dressed like that, you're wanting negative attention and stuff like that, and it's gonna happen. To another girl, like, no, I came down here, I dress how I want to dress. That don't give you the right to talk to me other way. To yes, one of the older Iotas, you could tell he was not he should
not have been there.
No, he was like their stage hand. He was like their stage manager at their step show, talking about, well, if you naked, I don't see your intelligence. I'm gonna see those cheeks, blah 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 blah. So yada yada yada. And it's just like, to get that time capsule of the thought process is what I really liked in the true crime documentary, which is why I think I wanted it a little bit more on the Freaknik Hulu documentary. Because again, my favorite portions of that documentary was, I love all of the archival footage. I love that we have so much of this footage, because of how documented it was, and how it's all like you know, documentation from people who were actually there. So I thought this documentary hit on a lot of things. I thought it introduced stuff to me that I had no idea about Freaknik, and I think it went there. I think it could have went a little bit further, but I appreciated it nonetheless.
Yeah. This was a fun watch for sure, but I definitely think that there's, like, you know, there's definitely probably larger conversation to be shown about the way people were perceiving these moments, right? Like Mari mentions in the True Life documentary or the True Life episode on MTV, we see that person's perspective go from I'm going to Freaknik to get on some freaks to, and then he slowly becomes like, oh yeah, we see him on the street, like I'm just taking pictures with all these girls. These girls letting you grab them, and then eventually he's like, well, why you showing it to me if I can't have it? I don't understand why you carry yourself like that. And then he sees what happens when people perpetuate that mindset, and that woman's clothes get ripped off, and he's like, oh no, it changed everything. And you see it scene to scene, this man's whole perspective change, and you see it in real time. And it's very fascinating to watch it, because it's like, yeah, those are the types of moments that it was very sobering for him. And then for him to have that sobering moment, and then we see the argument where people are saying, yeah, screw your sobering moment. She was dressed like that, so she deserved it. Those conversations are still being had today. They're still being had today, which is wild. But I think if you show more of those conversations being had, where you're showing people who believe in that archaic view of women have to dress a certain way to get some type of respect, versus people who are looking at it and talking about the humanity of people and saying that all people deserve respect no matter how they dress, then you can have these conversations and people can reference those and say, okay, let's move forward and stop believing in those old ways. But because, we kind of gloss over that sometimes in conversations, we don't get those conversations. And so I agree with Mari. Probably could have done a little bit more of that. But I think for Hulu, this was great. It was a fun watch. It taught me so much. It gave me a new appreciation for something that I always have heard, like almost like legend of. I'd never seen Freaknik. I'd seen clips of Freaknik. I've heard people talk about Freaknik. I've never been to Freaknik. So I just, wherever people tell me is what I was going to believe. And so to see it with my own eyes, Ty, this was great.
Yeah, man. I'm going to give a different perspective, and it's not against what y'all just stated, because I completely agree with you all. I like this documentary because it gave a perspective of what I recall and what my brothers recall, right? And that something they didn't talk about, and I'm not sure if this is a part of the founders or something separate, but I remember it being called Freedom Fest before it was called Freaknik, and it was just uprising of young African Americans, people just freely being expressive and having a good time. And for me, it was the part of that uprising was the musical era, all of the different genres that came about during this time period. It was just an amazing event that I can't and I can't really do it justice kind of speaking to. But I remember like King Edward J mixtapes during that time that they didn't really talk about. Just people on every street and corner. A group that I listen to a lot is Ghetto Mafia. They were popular during that time frame as well. And so a lot of people outside of Atlanta don't know who these people are, but I do. And I remember all of that being a part of that experience. And, I remember my brothers didn't have to have their perspective change about how to treat a woman during this experience. They just went out there and enjoyed themselves. My brother was, when he first started going to Freaknik, he was a senior in high school in 94. And he didn't have to learn how to treat a woman. And so that story that's being told on True Life or this is extremely important. But just what I appreciated from it is what it told the story about Atlanta and how it grew and how it built itself off the backs of Freaknik and has grown to what it is now, the Mecca, Mari.
Yeah,
I mean, it's the city Mecca or the college.
Listen, we're not doing that. We're not doing that today, because this very much was a love letter to Atlanta by way of Freaknik, and I enjoyed watching it as well. There were some big names throughout this entire thing. Like we mentioned Killer Mike, we've mentioned I think Lil Jon pops up at some points, or you get 21 Savage. Well, I thought was in the UK around that time. Who knows?
Right. Exactly.
Listen, he been there long enough to where he feels it. It's a part of the community that he grew up with.
No, he don't.
Yeah, per his words in this documentary, we saw Claudia Jordan, we saw Cecil from Married to Medicine, and these are just footage of them. They weren't even talking heads. You just see Claudia Jordan up on a balcony like, "Hey y'all," and so. stuff like that is so fun to watch, especially when it's archival footage. And so bring me more of that. Tell more Black stories with more evidence, because I like that kind of stuff. I don't really like when I have to go and like determine if something is real or fake. Show it to me, and then I can believe it myself, and then I can also, spread those stories to other people. This has been a great time. Y'all, we got to come up with something else to watch soon. We got to figure out something. Mari, you got anything on your radar?
Shirley's out.
Mhm.
The movie about Shirley Chisholm starring Regina King.
Yes.
So if we want to do that, we can hop on that for the next weekend. If not, like, we are open to hear everybody's suggestions.
Yep. You can email us, recapkickback@gmail.com. You can DM the Recap Kickback Twitter account @Recap Kickback. Also the TikTok, or even in the Facebook group. Let us know what you think we should talk about here on Recap Kickback, because we're here to talk about all the things you want to hear us talk about. So until then, keep us posted. Let us know what you're thinking, and then we'll give feedback and we'll see what we can do, because we want to keep the content coming. I have been talking to LaTanya Starks about joining us for Shirley. So we're going to work out her schedule as well. So that could possibly happen, but we will see. In the meantime, Tyrone, what you got going on?
Recap Kickback, man. I truly appreciate you and Mari for allowing me to come on this podcast. This one was very special to me because of the Atlanta thing, and I got so much pride in Atlanta, so I appreciate y'all. So if you want to hear me talk more about Black things, Atlanta, or any other thing out there in the world that taps into the culture of Recap Kickback, then you can find me here in the future.
Mari, I kind of feel like we got to talk about the Boondocks with Ty, because he doesn't know. I kind of feel like we got to do it. That was some of the feedback we got back from our bracket. I'd be willing to entertain an episode or two for in the next few days. Mari, do you think that'd be fun?
Well, that'd be very fun. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Let's put that.
Boondocks revisit.
Yeah. Let's put that on the docket. I think me and LaTanya can talk about Shirley. And I think the three of us can reconvene for the Boondocks. I think that's a bigger event. I do. So yeah, I think talking about Ty.
You kick me off the Shirley pod?
No. Yeah, listen, we have no interest in what Mari thinks about Shirley Chisholm. No, I'm joking. But I do think that I think being around for Ty's introduction to the Boondocks as a whole would be very fun. So we'll talk about it.
This is what happens when you give dudes the keys. Like,
that's it.
They just kick you off.
Yeah, that part. Mari, what do you have going on aside from getting kicked off the Shirley podcast and Bad and Bougie?
Of course, every Tuesday, me and Sarah Carradine bring True Crime Tuesdays to RJP with the Crime Scene podcast. Again, if you like this type of style, we go over documentaries, we take them apart piece by piece, and then we give our ratings and tell you if you should watch it. Last week, we teamed up with the Mess Magnets to form the Crime Magnets to talk about Quiet on Set. That was a journey. So you can listen to both our version, the Crime Scene version, and the Mess Magnets version by going to robhaswebsite.com/crime feed. This week coming up, guest Matt Scott will be tying Chappell's guest spots.
He wants to be me so bad. He wants to be me. So obsessed with me. Dang, Matt Scott.
To talk about Can I Tell You a Secret? A docuseries about cyber stalking in England. It was a cyber stalking case in England. We had a really good chat with Matt, me and Sarah. So definitely go check us out. You can also follow us on Twitter at Crime Scene RHAP, or follow our Facebook group Crime Scene Podcast on Facebook. Every week, me and Matt Scott bring the Wrestling Wrap Up, where we talk about pro wrestling, highlights in pro wrestling. Last week we brought Grace Leader, our unofficial third chair there, to talk about some of the storylines that aren't necessarily going to be showcased at WrestleMania. But that was the thought process. We were like, okay, we'll go with the storylines that aren't really being talked about. However, Black women are just dominating wrestling right now. So we had to talk about it. So if you're interested in listening to us talk about some really fun wrestling storylines that are going around right now, you can go to robhasawebsite.com/wrestling feed in order to subscribe. But you can also catch us on our own YouTube page. Again, if you're supporting this YouTube, come on, go to the Wrestling Rehap Up's YouTube and support us over there. Go to youtube.com/@wrestling-rehap-up. That's youtube.com/wrestling RHAPUP. And that's it for me.
All right. And for me, you can catch me all over the place. Of course, here on Recap Kickback, taking your suggestions, doing podcasts every time I get a chance. So G and I are still covering Abbott Elementary. We should have that episode out to you, the most recent 2 episodes out to you very soon. And then I am on the Nothing But Netflix podcast talking about 3 Body Problem this week with special guest Josh Wigler. This week on Club Condo with Rob on RHAP. We're talking about the most recent episode of Survivor. And then Sasha, Joseph, and I are talking about Below Deck on the Below Deck Wrap Up on the Bravo feed on RHAP. So I got a lot of podcasts coming your way. But again, you can always find me here on Recap Kickback. So for Ty and for Mari, thank you so much for listening. Thank y'all for tuning in. Thank y'all for subscribing, all your 5-star reviews, for kicking it at the recap. You ain't got to go home, but you know the rest. We'll talk to you all later. Peace.